Liz here again. All right, so I'm gonna show you how to turn your dough into some pizza. Now, a couple of things really quick, depending on the kind of crust that you want, is going to affect the baking temperature and time. For a traditional hand-tossed style pizza where the crust is a little bit chewy and crisp on the bottom, then you want to preheat your oven at 450. Also, if you are wanting to do a deep dish or a Neapolitan, which is a super thin crust, very, very crispy, then your oven would go to 500. Now, a note about that, if you are wanting to do a Neapolitan where it has that really nice crisp crust, you will need a baking stone instead of a pan because it maintains the heat better than a metal pan. And so what you would do then, if you want a Neapolitan pizza, you would actually put your stone pan into the oven while it's preheating so that the stone will get nice and hot. And then you would take your dressed pizza either on a piece of parchment paper or on a large pizza peel or a large wide spatula and transfer the pizza onto the hot stone and then bake it. If you don't have a stone, that's okay. You can still do a deep dish pizza or a hand tossed. For a deep dish pizza, you would want some kind of either a 9x13 pan or a 9x9 square pan. You could even do a round like cake style pan. I would recommend doing a dark finished pan if you want a deep dish to get that really nice crisp edge, because a dark finished pan is going to give you a crispier, crunchier edge. You will need to heavily grease a pan if you're doing a deep dish, because to get that really nice crisp, rich crust, you need a lot of olive oil in your pan. Today, I will be demonstrating a hand toss pizza because it's the simplest and easiest to do. The printout of the recipe does have more guidelines for the Neapolitan and the deep dish. If you have any questions, feel free to post in the classroom or send me a message. I'm happy to explain further about those other options, okay? All right, so what we're going to do is, you can see I've let my dough rise, and so it's gotten nice and fluffy here. It's about doubled in size. If you didn't let your dough rise and you're going straight from making the dough into making pizza, that's totally fine. Just be aware your dough may not be quite as stretchy, and so you have to have a little bit more patience while you're working it. What I'm doing now is just flouring my countertop so that my dough won't stick when I pull it out to spread it. And I'm actually going to split this dough in two because I'm going to make two different pizzas with different toppings. So for the first pizza, I'm just going to take my dough here, and you can see it has a beautiful stretch because it's had that nice rise. Okay, and so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it a little bit with my fingers in the air, and then I'm just going to lightly lay it in the flour and flip it over so it's floured on the top and the bottom so it won't stick to me. And then I'm going to come right over here to my pan. You do not have to grease your pan if you're doing a hand-tossed pizza. As long as you have a nice floured bottom, it won't stick. If it starts sticking while you're trying to stretch it, put some more flour on your dough, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm taking the edges of the dough and I'm very gently tugging. I would use your other hand to hold it in place so that it doesn't slide around. Try not to pull so hard that it tears, especially if your dough hasn't had a long rise time. The elasticity isn't going to be as good, and so your dough is more likely to spring back and try to shrink. Just be patient with it. If you're having a hard time getting it to stretch, you can kind of pick it up and let it use gravity to help pull it out, and then lay it back down and try again. If your dough continues to go and shrink back down, give it a few minutes to rest where it's at, already stretched, and then come back to it. You have to have a little bit of patience, okay? Now, if you're doing a round pizza, I'm doing a couple of rectangles today, but if you're doing a round pizza, you can do, I'll show you with this other piece here, get some flour going. You can do just a rotation where you pick it up and rotate in a circle around and around and around and around and around, and it will eventually begin to grow. And then you can use your fists and go back and forth underneath, and that will allow gravity to stretch down the sides if you're doing a round pizza. So up and down is what I'm doing, and just slowly rotating the dough across the tops of my hands, okay? But for this rectangle pizza, and I'm going fairly thin here, I'm just gonna tug on the pan because it's easier to do if I'm making the crust fairly thin. Now, thin but not transparent. If you stretch the dough to the point where you can almost see through it, that's too thin. It's not going to crisp up. It's going to end up becoming soggy because your sauce is going to try to soak through that transparent spot. So if that happens, try to spread some of the dough to cover that transparent space, because we don't want a soggy crust. Okay. Now, if you want an edge crust, where the outer layer of the pizza is only crust, the trick there is simply not putting your sauce and your toppings edge to edge. If you want that nice crust line, as you apply your toppings and your sauce, you're just gonna leave an edge. If you're not a big fan of just the plain crust, take your sauce all the way to the edge of your pizza. By leaving that space on the edge without the toppings, the crust will naturally grow higher than the center of the pizza because it's not being weighed down by sauce or toppings. So your outer crust will naturally rise up around the edge if there's nothing on top of it as there is in the center of your pizza. So I'm just gonna patch a couple of my transparent spaces here, just like that. Okay, so I've got that fairly stretched. I'm gonna go ahead and turn my oven on to 450 since I'm doing a hand tossed. Now, if you're doing a large pizza, your bake time is a little bit longer. The bake times in the recipe are recommended for a personal pizza. So if you're making a pizza that's just for one individual, that will bake a little quicker. For a hand tossed crust, probably 10 to 12 minutes. If you're doing a large pizza, you will need a little bit longer of a bake time. I would say 15 to 20 if you're doing a full pan pizza in a hand tossed style. All right. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my toppings. So for this, I'm just doing a very simple canned pasta sauce, and I'm just going to spread this on in a very thin, transparent layer. The key to not getting a soggy crust and having a nice crisp bottom is not layering your toppings too heavy. If your toppings are too heavy on your crust, it can't bake all the way through. And so you want to make sure that you're not leaving so much weight on top of it that it can't get all the way through. So I am going edge to edge because my family is not a huge fan of extra crust. That's why we have cheese bread or breadsticks. Okay. So I'm going to show you how to make some cheese bread here in a little bit with a, you can either use a French loaf of bread, or you can use pre-seasoned garlic bread. You can use a baguette, whatever style bread you want. I'm going to show you how to turn that loaf into some cheese bread in just a little bit. All right, so I have my sauce on, nice thin layer. I can still see the dough through it. So it gives me that nice sauce while still leaving our dough so it can be crisp, okay? Now, I'm gonna add my cheese because I like toppings on top of my cheese, especially if I'm doing half and half in toppings. You can put your toppings on and then your cheese if you prefer. We just prefer to have toppings on top. Now, a really important piece of information when using a bag of shredded cheese: do not put your hand directly into the bag of cheese if you're not planning to use the whole thing, because any bacteria that you have picked up on your fingers from handling things in your kitchen, you will introduce to the bag of cheese and cause it to mold. It will mold very quickly within a few days if you put your hand directly in there, because you're introducing bacteria to fresh cheese. Now, if you're going to use the whole bag of cheese, like I am, then absolutely, you can reach your hand down in there. But do not put your hand into the bag of cheese if you're not planning to use all of it, because you don't want your cheese to mold. All right, so I'm just going to do a thin layer of cheese all the way across, edge to edge. I'm gonna use about half this bag for this pizza and half the bag for the next pizza I'm doing. Okay. So on this pizza, I'm doing just a basic pasta tomato sauce with, I'm gonna do half pepperoni and half olive because that's my kid's favorite. And then my second pizza, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm gonna be doing a barbecue pizza with pineapple, chicken, and bacon. That's my husband's preference. I do not eat meat, and so I usually leave a portion of that pizza with just some pineapple and then also add some olives to it. Sometimes some artichoke hearts. It's very, very good. All right. If you have any questions about flavor combinations or toppings, what would work well with the kind of sauce you're wanting to use, if you'd like some recommendations on some sauce recipes, if you want to try something different, send me a message. I'm happy to help out. Another popular one in our house is instead of sauce, we use a pesto, which is really delicious. And then you can do artichoke hearts and different kinds of vegetables. It's really good with goat cheese. Really, really tasty. Okay, so I've got a nice thin layer of cheese here. Now I'm gonna lay out my pepperoni. Okay, I'm just gonna do this on half. All right. Feel free to comment in the classroom too, what your favorite pizza toppings are. I'd love to see some discussion on favorite pizza toppings, or a pizza topping that you've been interested in trying. I'd love to see some discussion in the classroom about that. It's always fun. I am a firm believer that pineapple is definitely a pizza topping, but there are lots of people who do not believe that. So I'd love to know what your opinion is on pineapple on pizza. All right, so I'm just gonna do half there. And then I have some pre-sliced olives. I'm just gonna pour off some of this juice here. Okay. And just pull out a few of these to sprinkle on top. Okay. Just like that. Easy peasy. All right. Perfect. All right, so then once my oven is preheated, this is gonna go into the oven for a full-size pizza, like I said, probably about 15 minutes. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna get my second pizza made and ready to go and baked, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to make some cheese bread and a nice Italian salad.